Hello there, and welcome to Know Where to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Well, a bunch of new laws went into effect a week ago today. Yep, July 1st is when many laws go into effect here in the state of Idaho. And it's very interesting how legacy media picks, well, these are the laws that went into effect today versus some of the laws that they didn't mention. I've got an example that hopefully will shed some light on the differing agenda in how the new laws are being reported. And you'll be happy to know that there are some really good new laws that went into effect as of July 1st.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Know Where to Hide. I don't know if you keep track of every new law that has been enacted in the state of Idaho. I know there are some laws that have what's apparently an emergency enactment clause, meaning when the governor signs them, boom, they go into effect right then. But otherwise, July 1st is kind of the date that we watch for because that's when a number of the laws signed by the governor will go into effect, as well as the new budget. So there's a lot to keep track of here. Now, here's what's interesting. When you look at how the legacy media, in this case, the Idaho Capital Sun, goes about reporting these new laws, you would think that they'd want to give you a bit of a broad cross section. There are a lot of laws. They probably can't, account for all of them. But I want you to see what they picked. And then I'm going to contrast that with some other laws that went into effect. And I just have to wonder, why didn't they feel it was worth lauding these other new laws? So the headline is New Budget, Some New State Laws Take Effect Today in Idaho. This was back from July 1st, a week ago today. Mandatory minimum fines for marijuana, higher pay for judges, and sleeping in public spaces ban take effect these week. Now, these are all important laws. So we'll just kind of walk through them real quick. House Bill 7 creates a new mandatory minimum fine of $300 for adults convicted of possessing less than 3 ounces of marijuana. Next, we have House Bill 322, increasing the salaries for judges in Idaho. Before the 2025 legislative session, apparently, Idaho Supreme Court justices encouraged the legislature to raise that pay for judges, saying that to pay for Idaho judges was among the lowest in the nation. Well, the new law bumps it up by about $17,000 per year. That's enough for a down payment on a tank of gas, right? Then we have House Bill 205. This bill allows drivers to exceed the speed limit when they're using the passing lane to pass another vehicle on roads and highways outside of city limits with a speed limit of 55 miles an hour. It does not apply to vehicles passing on the right side. So apparently previously state law allowed drivers to exceed the speed limit when they were passing on a 2-lane road. That new bill adds passing lanes to that section of law. Now you can see these are important laws, things you would want to know. Senate Bill 1099, this bill provides for a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 5 years for a person found guilty of driving under the influence, who's found guilty, if they're again found guilty of DUI, along with vehicular manslaughter. Let's see, did we have one more? Yep, one more. Senate Bill 1144. This bill adds a new section to state law that requires that for new and existing highway projects, existing or new bicycle and pedestrian facilities may only be improved as a secondary or collateral benefit to any highway project, or to improve safety near schools, parks, or other areas designated for bicycles and pedestrians. So there you have just kind of a quick recap of some of the laws that the Idaho Capital Sun was like, well, we're going to cover that. And we're going to, make sure that people are aware of these laws. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of the laws they're reporting are necessarily, something that they shouldn't have said, but it's curious what they left out. And we're going to cover some of that. This was one last one here. The statewide ban on sleeping in public spaces. Now, this law bans public camping as well as sleeping on public property in Idaho cities with a population of at least 100,000 people. Well, that's not going to be a lot of cities, but some nonprofit organizations say they're concerned that it will create hardships for people experiencing homelessness in Idaho. So we've got this nice, broad, categorization of these are some of the laws that go into effect, but let's look at some of the ones that were left out. And we can thank the Citizens Alliance of Idaho, and also I'll thank Senator Brian Lenny for bringing this to my attention, because we have some laws really worth celebrating. One of the laws passed in the last legislative session, signed into law by the governor, protecting women in private spaces, ensuring the privacy and safety of women by ensuring that private spaces like restrooms, locker rooms, in state-run facilities, including women's prisons and juvenile detention centers, are designated based on biological sex. That is a big one. But isn't it curious the news media didn't want to talk about this? How about this one? This is huge. Idaho Medical Freedom Act. Thank you, Senator Dan Foreman and Representative Rob Beiswinger. This act protects Idahoans' medical autonomy by preventing government overreach in healthcare decisions, ensuring individuals have the freedom to make their own medical choices without coercion. Now, you may be asking, okay, why would this be more important than, a law, adding a higher criminal penalty for possession of 3 ounces or less of marijuana or something like that? Okay, the reason that this is so curious and the reason that it strikes me as odd that, well, that's funny, the Idaho Capital Sun and others didn't really dwell on a lot of those laws that were passed that actually reined in the public health bureaucracy that went rampant during COVID. And it's taken 5 years, right? It's taken 5 years and not a small amount of manipulation on the part of the governor and others to avoid accountability. But I'm very happy to see that accountability finally coming about. Just curious why it wasn't reported more, by mainstream sources, why it's not celebrated. Maybe it doesn't line up with their agenda. A couple other laws that we ought to think about. Again, thank you, Senator Brian Lenny. Health districts must base their policies on science. This mandates that health districts in Idaho base their public health policies on verifiable scientific evidence, promoting transparency and accountability in public health decisions. And look, not to rub salt in anybody's wounds, but the masking mandates, the distancing mandates, the lockdown orders, the essential versus non-essential designations, it was all crap. It was made up. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and others, they came up with this, well, we thought it sounded like a good idea, but there was no scientific basis. You don't hear a lot of talk about that in mainstream media, probably for good reason, because it would cast doubts on, well, if they're telling us to do something now, can we trust them? Well, based on past performance, maybe you should have a little bit of skepticism. All right, let's take a look at another couple laws that were passed. How about this one? Protecting doctors' right to operate within their conscience. Now, this could apply to a number of different areas, but again, the law here is to prevent doctors from being forced to perform procedures or be involved in practicing medicine that violates their moral conscience. Kudos. Probably long overdue. Here's another good one. This one made me very happy. Ivermectin available over the counter. Sponsored by Senator Tammy Nichols and Representative Jordan Redmond. Ivermectin is now available over the counter in Idaho, giving greater healthcare options and greater control over their medical treatments. But you know that this is going to upset some of the usual suspects, and I've got perfect evidence of this. Oh, what's this? A new editorial from the Idaho Statesman? Idaho ivermectin bill shows need for stronger conflict rules. And apparently the gist of what's going on here is one of the senators or one of the representatives who voted on this particular make ivermectin over-the-counter bill owns a pharmacy. Now, he disclosed his conflict of interest, but still debated and voted on the bill, which, it's not like, it can only be distributed through my store. But it's the displeasure of how dare people be able to access this and make their own decisions, when they have perfectly good bureaucrats telling them what to do. And so, Julie Yamamoto and the other members of the editorial board, definitely showing their displeasure that you now have that choice when it comes to your own health decisions. Okay, a couple more quick ones here. No forced mask mandates. Again, kudos to Senator Lenny. The law prohibits mandatory mask requirements, ensuring you and your children can participate in society without being compelled to wear a mask. I should also tip my hat to Representative Rob Beiswinger for his support of this as well. All right, one last one. This is no taxpayer money for soda and candy on SNAP. Oh, I know it seems heartless and it seems cruel, but this law would exclude candy and soda from SNAP or food stamps eligibility, ensuring taxpayer dollars are used responsibly to support nutritious food choices. I know, doesn't it just sound like the conservatives are taking over the world and trying to impose goodness on it? But more curious than anything is that when it comes to summarizing, well, here are some of the new laws that are going into effect. Isn't it curious how mainstream media does not want to talk about any of the laws that limit government power over us or that reduce the size and scope of government or clarify it to the point that people can't become mischievous with it? I just thought that was interesting. I mean, even if they just mention one, it would just be kind of a, balance of here's what's out there. But the stuff they picked seems to stay far away from that. I think there's a lesson there, although I'm not sure exactly what it is. We'll have to think about this and maybe get back to you in a later episode. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.